Hi, my name is Richard Crawford, host of Supply and Demand Show, an enlightening webcast show where we delve into the dynamic world of the global supply chain, and we will navigate through the complexities, disruptions, and innovations that shape this vital network of interconnected businesses. From sourcing raw materials to delivering finished products, we'll uncover the challenges that arise at each stage and explore the strategies for optimizing efficiency and sustainability. And each week we'll highlight and discuss a specific supply chain topic. And of course, I'm joined each week by my co-host, CEO of the Atlas Network and author of Supply Chain Ups and Downs, Mr. Kareem Kapoori. How are you, buddy?
Good, man. How are you? How's it going?
I'm doing good. One of these days, I'm going to bring that mic up and say, let's get ready to rumble.
And then I'm going to have to fight on the stage. Listen, there's a few things we should talk about before we bring on our guest and everything. But I want to talk for a second about my recent trip to Cleveland.
Yeah.
I was just in Cleveland last week, which is the third largest manufacturing city in the United States.
Yep.
And I was asked to be a keynote speaker on tariffs. Everybody's talking about tariffs.
Yep.
With regards to the chief executive group. And it was an unbelievable time in Cleveland. First of all, I'd never been to Cleveland before. And what a nice, compact, interesting city. But what I found so fascinating was the level of actual US-based manufacturing that's happening there. We went to a steel mill, like as a field trip on the first day, which how many steel mills have you heard of that are in the United States outside of what was Bethlehem Steel how many years ago? And then the second day, we went to this amazing place called Nottingham Spurk. And I bring it up just because, maybe we'll have a little footage around that, which basically has almost close to 2,000 patents of products that 95% of which have been commercialized. And we're talking about some of the most common things that we use every day, like Swiffer wet jets, the little tiny cup that goes on the top of medicine to let you know how much to dispense, drink. Just amazing technological advancements that they've been doing out of this place for the last 40 or 50 years called Nottingham Spurk. And it really just was so fascinating and interesting to see the level of innovation, manufacturing, and ideation that's happening in Cleveland. So anyway, I just wanted to make a note of that, a shout out to Cleveland. What an interesting city and the things that they're doing. And they actually are bringing Intel there now. As well as a bunch of other major companies that have been relocating or locating to Cleveland because of its proximity to, so many areas for distribution and manufacturing. But anyway, we can talk about today's topic too. Let's get into today's topic as a separate thing. What do you think?
All right, let's do it. What is it?
Well, today's topic, I think, is really about, the Middle East and Middle Eastern affairs and what's been happening. Recently, President Trump has traveled there. And while he was there, he's been in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, and he's been talking a lot about, levels of cooperation between the United States and Saudi Arabia. Outside of that, he's also been looking to just have kind of a generalized presence in the Middle East and speaking with all the different leaders from many of the different countries, and more specifically, Syria has come up on the radar big time around sort of reducing some of the sanctions against Syria to allow them to have some levels at greatness, as he put it. He's been meeting with the president there and things of that nature. And then even, in typical Trump style, he always has some kind of a, interesting headline. And one headline that I saw recently was that, Qatar had approached him to try to replace Air Force One. And the reason why was because of supply chain issues. He said, hey, I don't want to, hurt Boeing or take anything away from Boeing, but, they're really, really late on the planes that they owe us for Air Force One. And, the president of Qatar said, hey, let me just give you a gift of giving you a couple of planes here. And he's not going to do it. But the point is that, it's always for, some level of headlines and sensation.
He's not going to take the plane?
Which one? The one from Qatar?
Yeah.
No, I don't think he can for national security reasons. Think about it. I mean, he's got to take, there are certain levels of manufacturing and certain things that must be done, protected, engineered, managed here in the US.
Right. No, I get that. And he'd had to retrofit it. And retrofitting it is the same as getting all the parts that they would need for the Boeing. So it's the same issue you're going to have to retrofit it for 3 years. Anyway,
you're right.
I guess it's headline sensationalism because I was under the impression that it was happening.
Well, I don't know if he would do that, and I don't know if he could do that based on level of national security.
I mean, don't know if he could do it. What does that matter to him?
Yeah, true. That's true.
Right.
But the reality of it is that I'm actually going to be in the Middle East. I'm going to be going back to Lebanon in the end of June and until the middle of July. And from what I've heard from friends of mine and colleagues and family out there is that there's this huge resurgence and boom of manufacturing and distribution, and really just kind of Middle East kind of trying to get some levels of foothold now. Right. And so I'm very interested to go there. I'll probably shoot some footage when I'm there. Maybe we'll even do a live show from the Middle East when I'm there, because apparently there's a lot of things happening in the Middle East. Anyway, just want to touch upon that real quick before we get into our today's guest.
Yeah. All right. So let's bring in today's guest. And I have to say, I'm really excited about our guest today because he's actually a good friend of mine and someone who is very highly respected in the Scotch whisky industry. And he's known for his innovative approach to distilling and whisky creation at the Glenmorangie Company. And he serves as the director of distilling, whisky creation and whisky stocks, are always held for over 25 years. He's also a pioneer of wood management in the malt whisky industry and known for his exotic casks and exploration of different wood finishes. Ladies and gentlemen, please a very, very big warm welcome to the show for Dr. Bill Lumsden. Bill, how are you, my friend?
I'm terrific, thanks, Richard, and a big congratulations to you for actually getting my job title correct. Very few people do that.
Oh, wow. What do you usually get called? The distiller? Just the distiller?
I get called all sorts of things. Actually, everyone refers to me as Dr. Bill within the company.
Right.
But, I know my job title is a bit of a mouthful, but I answer to many things, as you can imagine.
Well, I have to say, I really am excited to have you on today. I know how busy you are. Glenmorangie is obviously, a huge global company that keeps you very, very busy. So it's great to have you on today. Where are you? Are you in?
Yeah, I'm actually at home today, just in the outskirts of Edinburgh, Richard.
Oh, good.
So I had a very, very busy week and really a fabulous week at the company because, obviously being a director, I have various responsibilities, but this week was ruthlessly focused on whiskey. So, some exciting new Glenmorangie projects, one or two for Ardbeg. And actually this morning I was just writing a little paper for the board on my secret, but actually not so secret experimental distillery, the Lighthouse. Wow. Lots of variety in my role, and I wouldn't have it any other way, Richard.
No, so that is exciting. You have to tell me that secret later. So just jumping right in, though, obviously Scotch whisky in Scotland is a domestic product. For the most part, all of the materials are Scottish, right?
Yeah.
The barley comes from further afield, to the south. So what kind of supply chain issues do you face currently in the Scotch whisky industry?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you kicked things off, Richard, by mentioning barley, because, my policy for our company is to buy 100% Scottish. And, it's not because barley from England or Denmark or Germany or whatever is not as good. But I just think for two reasons, from a brand perspective, I think I like to make everything as Scottish as possible.
Right.
And obviously from a supply chain perspective, it's much more straightforward to have the barley grown in Scotland, stored in Scotland, malted in Scotland, and then supplied to the distilleries. So there definitely is a supply chain angle to that.
Right.
But the barrels, which is the other real key raw ingredient we use, as well as I do, with your Scottish roots, Richard, that oak which has to be used by law to make Scotch whisky, there isn't an awful lot of oak in Scotland. Right. So, the barrels come from elsewhere. And obviously, given our preference to use barrels which have been seasoned once previously with either American whiskey or Spanish sherry or something like that, then obviously there is logistical challenges there. And, sorry, Kerim, you look like you're going to ask me something there.
Yeah, no, I'm fascinated, and I obviously love the realm of Scotch and the entire process. So I'm fascinated about it. I was going to say, back to the barley question.
Sure.
And we had this topic come up with a previous guest who was talking about the cigar industry and so on. And I always look at these, calculatable supply chain areas and bottlenecks, but then those that are the unforeseen. So let me ask you a question. Since you rely on this agricultural product, right, barley, what do you deal with when, Mother Nature doesn't cooperate? Bad drought, and there's a problem. How does that flow into what you do?
Yeah, Kerim, it's an excellent and very, very timely question. So I think I mentioned to you guys before I came live on air that I live in the outskirts of Edinburgh. So I live out in the countryside, and where I live, the fields surrounding me are used to grow malting barley and wheat. And most of the wheat here goes into the production of grain whiskey. So my wife and I went for our daily walk. We've got a series of beautiful walks we do in the area. So we were in amongst all the fields of barley, and I said to my wife that unless we get rain over the next 2 to 4 weeks, it's going to put enormous pressure on the crop. And we've got one of these rather unusual spells for Scotland where we haven't actually had proper rain for about 6 weeks now. And the crop's all starting to grow. So it was a fabulous spring in Scotland, absolutely perfect for sowing the crop into the ground, at the end of February through into March. But really, unless we get some rain now, there's going to be a number of challenges. And what's likely to happen is that the corns won't be as bold, so there won't be as much starch laying down. Therefore, we will get reduced alcohol yield. Right. And, personally, I can handle that as long as the spirit quality is good.
Right. Sure.
The other thing that will happen is that the distillery managers will probably have difficulty processing the barley through the mash tun and into fermentation and into distillation. Now, again, as a former distillery manager, I really didn't mind these challenges because it kept things interesting.
Sure.
Yeah, but not everyone has the same view as myself there. But, one of the things that I've learned, I've been in the industry for nearly 40 years now, that the barley crop has an incredible capacity to equilibrate itself no matter what happens. And I think in all of that time, Kerim, I can only remember 1 year where the quality was so bad that it was almost impossible to make whiskey.
Right.
But to go back to answer your original question, the farmers, the maltsters and the distillers, while we're all enjoying getting out and about in our shirt sleeves and getting that most rare thing in Scotland, a suntan, we're getting a little bit nervous about it now.
Yeah, no, I get it. And that's exactly why I brought it up, because, when you're dealing with agricultural products like we're discussing here, and even, the source of oak, which is an important part of your process too, that's an agricultural product. If there's a depletion of oak or it isn't available, then that reduces your ability to produce your output and so on and so forth, or changes the profile in one way or the other, if it's a good quality or bad quality. I'm sure there are grades of that. It's really, really very, very fascinating and interesting to me, that part of the process, because in the world of supply chain, I'm always talking about how you have to try to be disruption proof. And how do you really do that when Mother Nature wants to throw a wrench? Does that mean you have to over purchase? Does that mean you have to stockpile barley? Does that mean you have to, buy more barrels than you think you need because you see a shortage that's coming? So you have to account for this, and this kind of level of, go forward planning to really be able to ensure that you can still have a Scottish product, that it can still be up to the standards. And whenever there are these ebbs and flows and disruptions, which I talk a lot in my book,
I see it behind you there.
Nice plug.
It's there. It's right there. The ups and downs, supply chain ups and downs. We're talking about ups and downs right now. And that you just basically have to know how to manage it properly, and that's being an expert at doing that and doing that for many years. So.
I mean, Karim, basically, I would say yes to all of the above. I mean, we do stockpile, we do overbuy, because the reality is that if you don't distill your product in year X, then in year X plus 10, you cannot then go back and make more. Right. So most companies in the Scotch whisky industry will operate with a surplus of at least 20% in terms of whisky stock versus your sales predictions. And it's very difficult to predict where you will be in 10 years' time. And I'm going to tell you something here which is no secret, and I'm sure you guys have already picked this up, but our industry is currently in a period where we have a bit of oversupply. With everything that's going on, all the macroeconomics, all the political situation in the world, demand for our product is not quite as strong as it was.
You'd never think it, Bill, based on the prices that are going up and up.
Well, that also is being looked at very carefully, Richard. And I think in terms of increasing prices, that we've reached the top there. Yeah. So, if you have Scottish blood like you and I have, and like a bargain, there could be some interesting bargains out there. But Karim, it is the whole business of supply chain. It is very, very well managed in some respects, but there's a big degree of chance and risk in there. And again, if I choose as an example the supply of sherry casks from Spain, these casks are hugely expensive.
Sure.
You're talking about 1,400 euros per cask.
Wow. Yeah.
So that's a very expensive part of your cost of goods. And once the sherry wine is emptied out of these barrels, you really need to get them sealed on the lorry and shipped from Spain to Scotland, within a week. Yep. Because, you can sulfur treat the cask, but honestly, it taints the flavour of the whisky. So my specification is absolutely no sulfur treatment. So you are relying on a very smooth supply chain to get them from Spain to your distillery before they become infected. There's so much residual sugar there in the sherry residue that bacteria can grow up very quickly. So that part of the supply chain has to be spot on. The other side of the coin is that the most popular barrel we use in our industry, the good old American oak ex-bourbon barrel, because of the high strength of the American whiskey, we don't have these infection issues. So it's quite feasible for the barrels to be on a ship crossing the pond from the east coast of the States to Scotland and take several months. There is really no issue from that perspective.
So, Bill, I have to ask you about the American casks. Based on the current economic and political theatre that we're in, is there a tariff being added to the casks coming over to Scotland? Because most of the whiskey in Scotland is matured and used American oak casks, right? Yeah, and obviously. So, has that been a big hit?
Oh, I am probably the wrong person to be asking questions like that. And, my perspective is that the tariffs are completely out with our control.
Right, yeah.
So they're going to be, and honestly, Richard, I hadn't actually thought about tariffs being imposed on the casks we bring in.
Right.
But, if they are, it will still be a small proportion of the overall cost. And there's no question, not only do we need it by law, because as you know, Richard, being in the industry, it has to be matured in Scotland in oak for a minimum of 3 years.
Yep.
In reality, much longer than that, particularly for prestige whiskey. So we will continue to buy no matter what. We need them. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, I think you're lucky that between the United States and Scotland there are no excessive trade conflicts right now. And so with that in mind, I think that you're generally okay. Maybe it's because Trump is part Scottish, so it could be. But the point being is that that doesn't exist right now. But for many other industries, if you were tacked on with 145% tariff, imagine what that would do as far as the mechanics and the economics of your business. And that's the case with so many businesses, let's say in the United States, that were overly reliant upon products from Asia or from other parts of the nation. Look at even Japan. If America was to try to export rice to Japan, it would have a 700% tariff on it. And there are other products that are like that in the United States. If we tried to import in already pre-made cabinetry from China, it has a 300 plus tariff because it's anti-dumping, and it basically took away the furniture making industry in the United States. So, I mean, fortunately, I don't believe that exists for your industry and for those imported products. But imagine if it did. That would be just absolutely.
Although we do make furniture out of used cask staves. So
I've seen some very nice drinks cabinets made out of them. But you're right, Kareem. It doesn't exist like that. And the synergy between the American whiskey industry and the Scotch whiskey industry has been very strong for many, many years. And I do not see that changing anytime soon.
Of course. People have to drink in good times and in bad times. Right. So the point is that, let's just keep the quality really high, of course. Yeah. And, everything you were talking about, I find very, very interesting and relatable, because my company, the Atlas Network, one of the big things that we do here is we have over 450 spirits and beverage clients. Right. We manufacture all of the glass and consumer packaging for these groups. So I'm consistently talking with distilleries throughout the world and in different places that are dealing with these challenges, getting their barrels, getting their sugar, getting their raw materials to be able to do the fermentation process. So I'm as you're talking about this, I'm very aware of all of these challenges that you're discussing.
And you're quite right, Kareem, that it's not just about getting the barley to the distillery, getting the yeast in, getting the barrels. You have to get the glass to your bottling plant. You have to get their packaging. So it's almost like consumers see this beautiful glass of whiskey, and it's a little bit like a duck on the water. It's all very calm, but there's furious activity underneath the surface, and it really is quite a complicated process.
Of course.
All right, so let's get into the fun stuff, right? Let's get into. We're going to put you in the hot seat, Dr. Bill, and this is where you're going to answer 3 questions as close to 5 minutes as possible.
Right,
5 minutes for each question. We had a guest one time thought that was the case, and
Oh no! I'll be more succinct than that.
Yeah. So, are you ready for this?
Indeed, I am.
All right, so we will start now. All right, so the first question. If you could create a whiskey inspired by any fictional character, maybe James Bond or Gandalf as an example, who would it be, and what would the flavour profile be like?
Right. No, this is maybe going to be a little bit of an obscure one, Richard, but when I was studying for my PhD at the Brewing and Distilling Department at Heriot-Watt back in the 1980s, I was a fanatical fan of a comic called 2000 AD. Now, the most famous character from 2000 AD was Judge Dredd, but my favourite was a character called Slain, Slaine. And Slain was a Celtic barbarian, and he was able to take the power from the earth goddess and warp it through his body. So if you imagine the transformation of the Incredible Hulk, that was nothing compared to what Slain could do. And he would turn around in his own skin and he would fight thousands. It's really, really fascinating. So I would like to do a whiskey inspired by Slain. So what that would entail, and I have no idea how to do this, but when you drink it and add water, it's almost like that would give power to the whiskey, and it would completely change its colour and flavour as you're drinking it.
Oh, so you basically are, it's almost like some version of like ouzo, where you put in a little water and it turns white, you know. In the Middle Eastern culture, we call it arak.
Yeah, I know ouzo and arak. It's along these lines, but this reaction would be far more violent and spectacular than that. And you would feel the power coming through the ley lines and going up through your body and into the glass.
That might be one of the best answers I've ever heard on the show.
That's very, very good. All right, I'll take you to question 2, Dr. Bill. What's the most bizarre influence you've ever considered putting into a whiskey? Something that really made your team raise their eyebrows.
Right. Now, obviously, I need to be a little bit discreet about this, because the answer to that is something I haven't yet released on the market. But suffice to say, I'm a huge fan of Halloween. I always have been, and I love the fact that you guys in the States really celebrate it. I'm a fan of some of the seasonal pumpkin spiced ales.
Yes, sure.
Need I say any more?
No, we get it. We get it. Here in the United States, when it's around that time of year, everybody's got out their pumpkin spice something, whether it's Starbucks' lattes or whatever. I mean, I get it, and it's very popular, so I understand.
Just to add a little side note, Kareem, you might not know this, but Dr. Lumsden was a real pioneer in maturing whiskies and casks that weren't traditional, wines and ports and stuff like that. And at a time when other people they kind of frowned on it, Bill, and you held your ground, and now that's the thing today. It's a big part of the industry.
And I actually sit on the Scotch Whisky Association committee looking at the Scotch Whisky regulations. So they've invited, I don't know if the poacher to become a gamekeeper if you like.
All right, so you got about a minute and a half for this last one. You can only take one Glenmorangie expression to a desert island, but you also get to take one luxury and one guilty pleasure. One guilty pleasure snack to pair with it. What are you packing?
That was actually quite an easy one to answer, Richard, because, my perennial favourite is still Glenmorangie Original, and it was the very first malt whiskey I tasted even before I joined the industry. So that's what kick-started it all off for me. Right. So it would be the Glenmorangie Original, which is now bottled in a 12-year-old form. And the guilty pleasure I would take to enjoy with that, and it pairs so fabulously, is a lovely bit of foie gras.
Okay, there you go.
Wow.
And if you don't believe me, gents, please do try it. And that lovely creamy texture of the foie gras goes beautifully with Glenmorangie Original. And, obviously not everyone is comfortable with foie gras, so that really is my guilty pleasure.
There you go. Perfect answer. Well, I will stop now. So you had just a little bit of time to spare, which is good, but probably 12 seconds or so. So that's pretty good. That's pretty close. We had a guest one time, Bill, who was within half a second.
Oh, wow. Gosh.
Now, it was either really lucky or they were sitting with a stopwatch in front of them.
Well, I certainly was watching the timer on my PC screen, Richard. But if you are fascinated by my first answer, please do Google Slain McRoth from 2000 AD. It's absolutely incredible.
I've got this image of, this clansman holding up this sword and lightning hitting it, and long flowing hair and the big muscles.
You're all absolutely on the right lines, Richard.
Well, look, Bill, thank you so much again today. We know
we've got one more segment, Richard.
Don't forget. Yeah.
Don't forget. We have one.
Interestingly, it's what we call the last drop, Bill. And what we normally ask is if you could have a coffee with anybody in the world, alive or dead, who would it be and why? But I guess we'll change it from coffee to whiskey today, right? So you can have a single malt with anybody alive or dead, who and why?
I guess, and I know it's unlikely to happen because the person in question is total as far as I know during his lifetime, but it would be Prince Rogers Nelson.
Yes.
And I just, I'm still, as well as having seen him live and loving his music, I'm just totally blown away by the fact that on his albums, if you read the credits, it's written, composed, arranged, performed, everything by Prince. He just was so talented, and I would just love to know how one person had so much talent.
Yeah. You know, also something that a lot of people don't know is that he was an amazing basketball player.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah.
He was an absolutely amazing basketball player, and anybody who knew him, you know, if you look up on YouTube or anything, Prince and basketball, there's all these funny stories about how he would come out and he would play in his like ruffled shirts and his high-heeled shoes and like be like shooting the lights out. He was like a really good basketball player. He was small, but he was great. So
he also had a great appreciation for Paisley, which is the hometown where I grew up. So you know, I have that little connection too. You know, that was amazing, Bill. Again, thank you again so much. Thank you for your time. If people want to find out more about Glenmorangie or even Ardbeg, I know you're working with both those distilleries. Where can they go? How can they find out? What's the socials?
Yeah, go on to the websites. We've got fabulous websites for both brands, and you know, an added little bit of incentive at the moment on the Glenmorangie website is that our new brand ambassador, Harrison Ford, did some films, and you can view them all on the Glenmorangie website, and they're real fun because Harrison appears acting alongside us basically in them, and it's done very light-hearted and very tongue-in-cheek, so it's real fun.
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed them. I watched all of them. I binge watched them. They were good.
Well, look,
sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just going to say thank you very much, and Kareem, I will absolutely look out for your book. I think it's a must-have in my technical book collection.
Appreciate it.
That's a nice little segue into Kareem. How can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, no, I mean, thank you so much, Dr. Bill, first of all, for being here. As far as, you know, anything on my side, for any of the social media stuff, it's kareemkafoury.com. For any mass production, procurement, QC related services, it's theatlasnetwork.com. If anybody's interested in the book, it's supplychainupsanddowns.com or on Amazon. And, you know, thank you again. It was a great conversation. I look forward to hopefully visiting you and seeing the Glenmorangie location for sure.
That'd be great. And I've just taken a photo of you with the book in the background there, Kareem. So, okay, right.
Well, a little plug of my own. My TV show Leave No Trace Season 2 airs on Amazon Prime all over the world in June. So we're excited about that. So that's it. That's all I have to say.
I'll look out for that too, Richard.
Thank you. Again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching and listening. And just a reminder that each week we'll have a very special guest on to continue our conversation in the fascinating world of the global supply chain. And don't forget to follow our LinkedIn and YouTube pages at The Supply and Demand Show. Thank you very much, and we'll see you soon. Bye.